The glass shattered against the marble floor, red wine spreading like blood across the white stone. Kang Dae-suk stood frozen, his hand still raised from where he'd thrown it, while his wife stared at him with eyes that had finally stopped crying. "Did you ever love me?" Han Seo-rin asked, her voice eerily calm. "Or was I just convenient?" That question would haunt him. But not yet. Not in this moment when he still believed he was untouchable. 3 hours earlier, Dae-suk had been in a penthouse suite overlooking the Han River, his shirt unbuttoned, expensive cologne mingling with cheaper perfume. The woman, Min-ji, an aspiring actress, traced her fingers along his jaw. "When will I see you again?" she whispered, already knowing the answer but hoping anyway. He checked his watch, a limited edition Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars. "I'll call you." "That's what you said last time." Dae-suk smiled, the same devastating smile that had charmed investors and seduced women for 2 decades. "And I did call, didn't I?" 2 weeks later. "I'm a busy man, Min-ji." He stood, already buttoning his shirt, already mentally leaving. "You knew what this was when we started." She sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest, her hope crumbling in real time. "I thought maybe. I thought I was different." "You are different," he lied smoothly, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "That's why I keep coming back." But his driver knew the truth. As Dae-suk slid into the back seat of the Mercedes, Kim, who'd worked for him for 8 years, caught his eye in the rearview mirror. "Home, sir." "Where else would I go?" Dae-suk pulled out his phone, scrolling through messages from other women. Ji-won asking when they could meet. Hae-in sending photos he didn't ask for. Another number he didn't recognize, probably from last week's charity gala. "Your wife called the office today," Kim said carefully. 3 times. Dae-suk didn't look up. "Did she?" "She sounded upset, sir." Seo-rin is always upset about something. He deleted Ji-won's message without responding. That's what happens when people have too much time and too little purpose. Kim said nothing, but his knuckles tightened on the steering wheel. He'd known Mrs. Kang longer than he'd known his boss, had driven her to concerts before she gave up her career, had seen the light slowly die in her eyes. But chauffeurs who spoke out of turn didn't stay employed for long. The mansion in Gangnam rose before them, all glass and steel and architectural ego. Every light was on, which was unusual. Typically, Seo-rin would be in bed by now, pretending to sleep, pretending not to smell the perfume on his clothes. Dae-suk entered through the main hall, his footsteps echoing on marble imported from Italy. The house had cost $30 million and felt exactly that expensive, beautiful and cold and empty. Your home. Before we dive into the interesting discovery, hit the subscribe button and subscribe to our channel, and also tell us which country you're watching from so we our global family can connect. Alright, let's step back into the story. He turned. Seo-rin stood in the living room doorway, backlit by the floor-to-ceiling windows. She wore a simple white dress, her hair pulled back, no makeup. At 37, she was still beautiful in that understated way that had first attracted him, elegant, refined, like a piece of art you displayed but never touched. "Didn't expect you to be awake," he said, loosening his tie. "I know you didn't." She moved into the light, and he noticed her eyes were red-rimmed. "We need to talk." Dae-suk felt irritation spike in his chest. It was nearly midnight. He was tired. He didn't have the energy for whatever emotional crisis she'd manufactured. "Can it wait until tomorrow?" "No. It can't." Her voice was steady, which unsettled him more than tears would have. "I went to see Min-ji today." The world tilted slightly. "What?" "The actress. Min-ji Park. I saw her name in your text messages last week when you left your phone on the counter." Seo-rin walked to the bar, poured herself a glass of wine with hands that didn't shake. "I looked her up. Found her Instagram. Sent her a message asking to meet." Dae-suk's mind raced, calculating damage, preparing denials. "Seo-rin. She showed me the penthouse suite. Showed me the gifts you bought her. Showed me the messages." She took a sip of wine, her composure cracking just slightly. "She felt terrible, actually. Said she didn't know you were married. Which is funny, because we've been in magazines together. Our wedding was in every society publication in Seoul." What do you want me to say? He moved toward her, trying charm, trying warmth. You're upset. I understand. But you're taking this out of context. How many are there? She set down her glass. Not just Min-ji. All of them. How many women, Dae-suk? He laughed, a reflex, a deflection. You're being ridiculous. I'm being clear-eyed for the first time in 7 years. She pulled out her phone, started scrolling. G1 from marketing. Haein, the model. That influencer whose face is all over your Instagram likes. The intern from last year who suddenly got transferred to Busan. The executive's daughter. The journalist. Enough. His voice cut through hers, sharp as glass. No. She looked up, and the emptiness in her eyes terrified him more than anger ever could. It's not enough. It's never been enough for you, has it? I gave up my career. I gave up my dreams. I became whatever you needed me to be, the perfect wife, the beautiful accessory, the woman who smiled at your events and never asked questions. Her voice finally broke. And it still wasn't enough. You're emotional. You're not thinking clearly. He reached for her, but she stepped back. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in years. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking fragile. Do you remember Paris? 7 years ago, on that rooftop. The memory surfaced unbidden. Wine and starlight and her laugh, genuine and unguarded. He told her things that night he'd never told anyone. About his father who'd called him worthless. About building Mirage Group from nothing just to prove the old man wrong. About feeling empty despite all his success. I need you, he'd said and meant it. Or thought he did. You told me you loved me, Seo-rin continued, her voice barely above a whisper. You said I made you feel like you could be a better man. That together, we'd build something that mattered. She laughed, bitter and broken. I believed you. God, I was so stupid. You weren't stupid. The words came out softer than he intended. Then what was I? She looked at him, really looked at him, and he had to resist the urge to turn away. What am I to you, Dae-suk? Really? The question hung between them, heavy and impossible. Because he didn't know. He'd married her for reasons that made sense at the time. She was beautiful, cultured, from a good family with a struggling company he could acquire. She made him look stable, trustworthy, human. She was supposed to be part of the image, the perfect life he was constructing. But love? Had he ever loved her? Answer me, she pressed. Did you ever love me? Or was I just convenient? That's when he threw the glass. Not at her, never at her, but near enough that wine splashed her dress, that broken crystal scattered at her feet, that the message was clear. This conversation was over. You want to know the truth? His voice was ice, his face the mask he wore in boardrooms when crushing competitors. You were perfect for what I needed. Beautiful. Accomplished. From the right family. You played your role well. My role. She repeated the words like they were a foreign language. Yes. Your role. As my wife. Did you think it was going to be some fairy tale? We're not children, Seo-rin. He poured himself a drink, his back to her. You got a lifestyle most women would kill for. This house. The cars. The status. That was the deal. I never wanted any of this. Her voice was barely audible. I wanted you. You wanted the idea of me. The fantasy you built in your head. He turned, looked at her standing there in her wine-stained dress, and felt nothing but contempt for her weakness. I'm not that person. I never was. Silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Seoul's traffic 40 floors below. Finally, Seo-rin spoke, and her voice had changed, resolved, final. I'm leaving you. The words hit him like a physical blow. What? I've already spoken to a lawyer. I'm filing for divorce. She pulled papers from her purse, set them on the glass coffee table. You can have your lawyers look them over. I'm not asking for much. Just enough to start over. Panic clawed at his chest, unexpected and overwhelming. You can't leave. Yes, I can. Everything you have is because of me. His voice rose, control slipping. This house. Your lifestyle. Your reputation. You gave up playing piano in half-empty concert halls, and I made you someone. No. She stepped toward him, and for the first time in years, he saw steel in her spine. I gave up who I was, and you made me nothing. You made me a shadow. A decoration. Something you could ignore or use depending on your mood. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. I've spent 7 years waiting for you to love me. 7 years making excuses. 7 years dying a little more each day. You're being dramatic. I'm being honest. The words exploded out of her, years of suppression finally breaking through. You don't touch me anymore unless you're drunk and everyone else is busy. You introduce me as decorative at parties like it's a joke. You sleep with women half my age and don't even have the decency to hide it. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? How many times I've stood in rooms while people whispered about your latest conquest? If you knew, why didn't you say something? He challenged. Because I loved you. She was shouting now, composure completely shattered. Because I kept thinking if I was patient enough, if I was understanding enough, if I was perfect enough, you'd remember why you married me. But you don't care, do you? You never cared. That's not true. The words came automatically, defensive. Then prove it. She moved closer, searching his face desperately. Tell me one thing about me that matters to you. Not how I look or how I make you look. Something real. What's my favorite Chopin piece? What do I dream about? What makes me happy? He opened his mouth. Closed it. The silence was answer enough. You don't know, she whispered. After 7 years of marriage, you don't know anything about me. Rin, he reached for her wrist, fingers closing around delicate bone. Let me go. Not until you listen to reason. His grip tightened, not enough to hurt, just enough to remind her of the power dynamic. You think you'll be fine without me? You think anyone will want you? A failed pianist pushing 40 with nothing to her name. I don't care. She tried to pull away, but he held firm. Yes, you do. You care about all of this. The luxury. The status. The life I gave you. I said let go. She yanked harder, her other hand coming up to push against his chest. And that's when something inside Dae-suk snapped. Years of control. Years of getting everything he wanted. Years of people bowing and scraping and never, ever telling him no. It all compressed into a single moment of pure rage at being denied, at being left, at losing. I said, he pushed back, harder than he meant to. She stumbled backward, her heel catching on the edge of the rug. Her arms windmilled, reaching for something, anything. Her eyes met his, and in that split second, he saw fear replace defiance. Then she fell. The sound of her head hitting the marble edge of the coffee table was sickening, a wet crack that would echo in his nightmares forever. Silence. Complete, terrible silence. Rin. His voice sounded distant, unreal. Rin. She didn't move. Didn't blink. Blood began to pool beneath her head, dark against white marble, spreading slowly like spilled ink. Dae-suk's mind fractured. Part of him was screaming at his body to move, to help her, to call an ambulance. But another part, the calculating part that had built an empire, was already thinking about consequences. About what this meant. About what this looked like. He knelt beside her, hands shaking, and touched her neck. No pulse. Her eyes stared at the ceiling, fixed and empty, still holding the ghost of that fear. No. No, no, no. His hands hovered over her, unsure, useless. This wasn't, I didn't mean. But she was gone. The only woman who'd ever loved him, really loved him, was gone. And it was his fault. The first call he made wasn't to the police. It wasn't to an ambulance. It was to his lawyer, a man named Choi who'd made problems disappear from Mirage Group for 15 years. There's been an accident, Dae-suk said, his voice eerily calm despite the horror pooled at his feet. My wife. She fell. I need you here before I call anyone else. Don't touch anything. Don't move her. Don't call anyone. I'm 20 minutes away. Choi hung up without another word. Dae-suk stood in his living room, staring at his dead wife, and felt the full weight of what he'd become. Not a successful businessman. Not a powerful CEO. Not a charming seducer. A murderer. The word settled into his chest like a stone, cold and heavy and permanent. When Choi arrived, he surveyed the scene with professional detachment, his face betraying nothing. He was in his 50s, gray-haired, expensively dressed, and utterly mercenary in his morality. "Tell me exactly what happened," Choi said, pulling on latex gloves. Dae-suk recounted it, the argument, the push, the fall. Choi listened without interrupting, his eyes moving around the room, cataloging details. "All right," Choi said when he finished. "Here's what we're going to do. You were at the office. Working late. You have time-stamped emails, security footage showing you there. When you came home around midnight, you found her like this. Tragic accident. She'd been drinking," he gestured at her wine glass, "and slipped. Hit her head. The security footage will show me leaving earlier. I have people who can handle that. The building manager owes me favors." Choi was already moving, adjusting the scene. "You need to trust me. I've done this before." "Done what before?" Dae-suk asked, horror dawning. "Made things look different than they are." Choi gave him a sharp look. "You want to spend the next 20 years in prison? Or do you want to let me do my job?" They worked for the next hour. Moved her body slightly to make the angle of the fall more plausible. Removed any signs of the struggle, straightened the rug, cleaned up the wine from the throne glass. Created a narrative that made sense. Grieving husband finds beloved wife after tragic accident. Only then did Dae-suk call the police, and when he did, his voice broke in all the right places. "Please, you have to help. My wife, she's not breathing. There's blood. Please hurry." The first responders arrived within 15 minutes. They found Kang Dae-suk kneeling beside his wife's body, his expensive suit stained with her blood, his face a mask of anguish. "I found her like this," he sobbed. "I was working late. I came home and God, please tell me she's okay." The paramedic checked for a pulse, already knowing what he'd find. "I'm sorry, sir. She's gone." Dae-suk's performance was Oscar-worthy, collapsing against the wall, hands covering his face, shoulders shaking with manufactured grief. The police officers exchanged glances, their expressions sympathetic. Who would suspect Kang Dae-suk, pillar of Korean business, devoted husband? Detective Yoon Ji-soo arrived half an hour later. She was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, with the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much human cruelty. She walked through the scene slowly, cataloging details. "Mr. Kang," she said gently, "I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions." "Of course. Anything." He looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes. "You said you were working late?" "Yes. At the office. I have time-stamped emails, security footage." "And when you arrived home?" "Around midnight. I found her," his voice broke convincingly. "I found her here. Called 911 immediately." Detective Yoon's eyes moved around the room, lingering on details Dae-suk prayed she wouldn't find significant. The divorce papers on the coffee table, the splatter pattern of the wine that didn't quite match the story. "Had your wife been drinking heavily?" She'd been stressed lately. I think she'd had some wine, yes." "Stressed about what?" Dae-suk hesitated, playing the grieving husband who doesn't want to speak ill of the dead. She'd been feeling unfulfilled. Talking about going back to music. I was supportive, but I think the pressure of deciding was weighing on her. It was a beautiful lie, close enough to truth to be plausible, far enough to redirect blame. Seo Rin became the troubled wife, and he became the supportive husband dealing with tragedy. Detective Yoon's expression remained neutral. "I see. We'll need those security records from your office. Standard procedure." "Of course. Whatever you need." He met her eyes with just the right amount of grief-stricken sincerity. She didn't look convinced, but she also didn't have evidence. "Not yet. We'll be in touch, Mr. Kang. I'm very sorry for your loss." After everyone left, after the body was removed and the scene processed, Dae-suk sat alone in his enormous house and stared at the spot where his wife had died. He should feel guilty. He should feel something. Instead, all he felt was relief that he'd gotten away with it. That would change. But not yet. Not tonight. The funeral was 3 days later, an elaborate affair at Seoul's most prestigious memorial hall. Thousands attended, business leaders, politicians, celebrities, socialites, all paying their respects to the beloved wife of Kang Dae-suk. He stood at the front in a perfectly tailored black suit, receiving condolences with the right amount of devastation. People embraced him, murmured about what a tragedy it was, how much they'd loved Seo-rin, how devoted he must have been. "She was so lucky to have you," one woman said, tears streaming down her face. "I was the lucky one," Dae-suk replied, voice thick with false emotion. Min-ji came, looking uncomfortable and guilty. She approached him carefully. "Mr. Kang, I'm so sorry. I didn't know when she came to see me, I didn't know she was going to," she trailed off, unsure what she was even apologizing for. "It's all right," he said quietly, playing the role. She was troubled. "This isn't your fault." But as Min-ji walked away, he caught her wiping tears, and he realized she genuinely cared. These women, they weren't just conquests to themselves. They had feelings, complications, humanity. Things he'd never bothered to acknowledge. The thought vanished as quickly as it came. He had a performance to maintain. Seo-rin's sister, Hae-won, was the only person who looked at him with suspicion. She was younger by 5 years, a prosecutor in Busan, sharp and unforgiving. She'd never liked him, had tried to talk Seo-rin out of the marriage. "She called me," Hae-won said when she finally approached him, her voice low and dangerous. "The day she died. Said she was going to confront you about your affairs. Said she was finally leaving you." Dae-suk's face remained carefully neutral. She was confused. Emotional. "I wish I'd known how much she was struggling." "Don't." Hae-won's eyes were ice. "Don't pretend you cared about her. I know what you are. And I promise you, if you had anything to do with her death." "Are you accusing me of something?" His voice hardened slightly. "Not yet." She stepped closer. "But I'm watching you. And if I find even a hint that you hurt my sister, I will destroy you." The threat hung between them. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Dae-suk with the uncomfortable realization that not everyone believed the narrative. That night, alone in the house, the nightmares began. Seo-rin stood at her piano, playing Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her favorite, though he'd never bothered to remember that. Blood dripped from her fingers onto the white keys, leaving crimson streaks. "Did you ever love me?" she asked without turning around. I don't know." His voice in the dream was honest in ways he'd never been in life. She turned then, and her face was peaceful, forgiving, utterly damning. "Yes, you do. You just don't want to admit it." He woke gasping, drenched in sweat. The bedside clock read 3:47 a.m. The house was silent except for piano music. Faint, distant, but unmistakable. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. Dae-suk's blood turned to ice. He got up, followed the sound to the practice room. The door was closed. The music stopped the moment he touched the handle. Inside, the room was empty. The piano bench was neatly pushed in. No sheet music on the stand. But the air felt different, charged with something he couldn't name. "You're losing it," he told himself. Grief. Stress. Guilt. But he didn't believe it. 2 weeks after the funeral, he tried to return to normalcy. Called Ji-won, who'd sent condolence flowers. She came to the penthouse, dressed carefully, her sympathy genuine. "I can't imagine what you're going through," she said, touching his arm. "It's been difficult." He poured them both wine, falling into familiar patterns. But life goes on. They moved to the bedroom, and he tried to lose himself in the mechanical motions that used to bring him pleasure. But halfway through, he looked down at Ji-won and saw Seo-rin's face, pale, dead, accusing. He pulled away abruptly. "I can't. I'm sorry. You should go." Ji-won looked confused and hurt. "Did I do something wrong?" "No. It's me. I need to be alone." After she left, Dae-suk stood in the shower for an hour, trying to wash away the feeling of wrong that clung to his skin. The water was scalding, but he barely felt it. He tried again with Hae-in the following week. Same result. The desire that had driven him for years had simply vanished, replaced with a hollow emptiness that no amount of physical contact could fill. Work became his refuge, but even there, things were changing. Park Ji-hoon, a junior accountant who'd always seemed harmless, started asking questions. "Mr. Kong, I'm reviewing the security logs from corporate headquarters, and I noticed a small discrepancy." Ji-hoon adjusted his glasses nervously. "The night Mrs. Kong passed away. The system shows you left the building at 7:43 p.m., but the police report indicates you were there until midnight." Dae-suk's smile was smooth as silk. "System malfunction. You know how finicky those keypads can be." "Of course, sir. Of course." But Ji-hoon kept digging, kept asking questions, kept being just thorough enough to be dangerous. Then there was Kim, the security guard at his building. Old man Kim, who'd worked there for 15 years, who'd always been discreet and professional. He mentioned casually to another guard, within earshot of a reporter who happened to be visiting, that he'd seen Mrs. Kong that night. "She came to the building around 8 o'clock, Kim said. Looking upset. Asked where her husband was. I told her the executive floor. Never saw her leave." The reporter, a young woman from a gossip blog, filed it away. Published nothing yet. But word began to spread in whispers, in looks, in the way conversations stopped when Dae-suk entered a room. 3 weeks after the funeral, Hae-won called him. Her voice was different, triumphant, terrifying. "I found her diary," she said without preamble. Dae-suk's blood ran cold. "What?" "Seo-rin's personal journal. I was cleaning out her things from your bedroom, the bedroom you kept locked, by the way, which was suspicious, and I found it hidden in her nightstand. That's private property. She's dead. Privacy doesn't matter anymore." Hae-won's voice was savage. "And you know what she wrote? Everything. Every affair. Every cruel comment. Every time you made her feel worthless. Years of documentation. But it's the last entry that's really interesting." Dae-suk said nothing, his throat too tight to speak. "Would you like to hear it?" She didn't wait for an answer. "I'm going to confront him tonight. I'm going to ask him if he ever loved me. If he says no, or if he lies, I'm leaving. I've already spoken to a lawyer. I've already made arrangements. If I disappear after this, if something happens to me, it was never an accident. My husband is capable of many things. And I'm not sure I matter enough to him to be safe." The words hit him like bullets. "She knew," Hae-won continued. "She knew you were dangerous. And she confronted you anyway. Tell me, Dae-suk, what happened that night? What really happened?" "I found her dead when I came home from work. That's what happened." His voice was steady, but his hands shook. "Then you won't mind when I give this diary to Detective Yoon?" You can't. Watch me." She hung up. Dae-suk immediately called Choi. "We have a problem." The diary changed everything. Detective Yoon reopened the investigation, this time with new eyes and new motivation. She reviewed the autopsy report and noticed what she'd missed before, defensive bruising on Seo-rin's wrists. The angle of the head trauma that didn't quite match a simple fall. The timeline that didn't add up. She brought in forensic experts who re-examined the scene photos. They found evidence of the wine glass that had been thrown, glass fragments that had been swept up but left trace evidence. Blood spatter patterns that suggested she'd been standing when initially injured, not falling. Security footage was subpoenaed, real footage, not the doctored version Choi had provided. It showed Dae-suk leaving at 7:43 p.m. It showed Seo-rin arriving at 7:52 p.m., her face streaked with tears. It showed Dae-suk's car returning at 10:17 p.m., not midnight. A neighbor came forward who'd heard shouting that night. Raised voices. A man yelling. A woman screaming. Then a crash and terrible silence. Dae-suk's phone records were examined. The call to Choi, 17 minutes before he called police. What innocent man calls his lawyer before calling for help? The evidence mounted like stones in a cairn, each one insignificant alone but devastating together. The media caught wind of it. Headlines screamed, "Kong Dae-suk under investigation in wife's death." Was it really an accident? Diary suggests abuse, control in power couple's marriage. Reporters camped outside his house, his office, everywhere he went. His face became synonymous with wealth, privilege, murder. The board of Mirage Group called an emergency meeting. Chairman Lee, who'd been his mentor, his supporter, looked at him with cold calculation. Dae-suk, this has become a crisis we can no longer ignore. Stock prices have dropped 18%. Partners are pulling out. Your personal life has become a liability to this company. I built this company. Dae-suk slammed his hand on the table. I turned Mirage Group from nothing into a $50 billion empire. And we're grateful. Chairman Lee's voice was ice. But we're recommending you step down. Effective immediately. Until this matter is resolved. You can't do this. We can. And we are. The vote was unanimous. Even the executives who'd laughed at his conquests, who'd envied his freedom, now voted to remove him. Power, it turned out, was conditional. Transactional. Built on success and strength, it evaporated the moment weakness showed. The women disappeared next. Ji-won blocked his number. Hae-in deleted every photo that connected them. Min-ji gave an interview saying she'd been manipulated, used. One by one, they distanced themselves, protecting their own reputations. His inner circle, the men who'd celebrated his affairs over expensive dinners, suddenly became unavailable. Calls went to voicemail. Invitations were declined. He'd become radioactive, and no one wanted contamination. Dae-suk stood alone in his office on the 42nd floor, looking out at Seoul spread beneath him. The city he'd thought he owned. The empire he'd built. All of it crumbling because he'd pushed his wife too hard, because he'd never learned that people weren't possessions. The arrest came on a gray Tuesday morning. Detective Yoon arrived with 2 uniformed officers. She read him his rights with professional courtesy, her face betraying no satisfaction. Kang Dae-suk, you're under arrest for the murder of Han Seo-rin. You have the right to remain silent. The handcuffs felt heavier than they should. Cold metal against his wrists, wrists that had signed billion-dollar deals, that had touched countless women, that had pushed his wife to her death. He'd insisted on no cameras, but someone leaked it anyway. Photos appeared online within an hour. The mighty CEO, reduced to a criminal. Headlines screamed. Social media exploded. His name became poison. Mirage Group released a statement. We are shocked and saddened by these developments. Mr. Kang no longer represents our company or our values. Buildings bearing his name began rebranding. Partners erased him from their websites. His legacy, so carefully constructed, dismantled in days. The preliminary hearing was a media circus. Cameras everywhere. Protesters outside holding signs, "Justice for Seo-rin." Her photograph, beautiful, elegant, gone too soon, became a symbol. The prosecutor laid out the evidence systematically. The diary. The timeline. The forensics. The witnesses. Each piece damning, undeniable. This was not an accident, the prosecutor said. This was murder. Kang Dae-suk murdered his wife because she dared to leave him, because she dared to ask if he'd ever loved her, because she dared to demand basic human dignity. Dae-suk's lawyer, a new one, since Choi had been disbarred for evidence tampering, tried to argue reasonable doubt. But the evidence was overwhelming. The jury saw through every lie, every manipulation, every carefully constructed excuse. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every sordid detail emerged. The affairs, the cruelty, the years of emotional abuse. Women testified about how he'd used them. Colleagues testified about his arrogance. Hae-won testified about the phone call, about the diary, about her sister's slow destruction. Through it all, Dae-suk sat stone-faced, his expensive suit armor against the truth he couldn't deny. The worst moment came when they played a recording of Seo-rin's last piano recital, from 5 years earlier. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. The music filled the courtroom, beautiful, melancholy, heartbreaking. The defendant never attended this concert, the prosecutor said. He was too busy. He never heard his wife play. He never knew this was her favorite piece. Because he never bothered to know her at all. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood. In the matter of the state versus Kang Dae-suk, on the charge of murder in the 2nd degree, how do you find? Guilty. The word echoed through the courtroom. Gasps. Applause from the gallery that the judge quickly silenced. Hae-won collapsed into tears. Finally, justice for her sister. Dae-suk felt nothing. Just a strange, distant numbness, like watching his life happen to someone else. Additional charges of evidence tampering and obstruction of justice. How do you find? Guilty on all counts. The sentencing came 2 weeks later. The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd presided with stern fairness, looked at him with something like pity. Mr. Kong, you had everything. Wealth, success, a woman who loved you unconditionally. And you destroyed it all through arrogance, cruelty, and ultimately violence. She paused. The court sentences you to 25 years to life in prison, with no possibility of parole before 18 years served. 25 years. He was 43. He'd be 68 before he could even hope for freedom. His life, effectively over. They led him away in handcuffs. The last thing he saw before the doors closed was Seo-rin's photograph, held up by her sister, a reminder of what he destroyed. The cell was small. Gray concrete walls. A thin mattress. A stainless steel toilet without privacy. The fall from penthouse to prison was as absolute as death itself. Other inmates knew who he was. The rich CEO who'd murdered his wife. Some hated him on principle. Domestic violence was despised even in prison. Others just enjoyed seeing the mighty humbled, treated him with the casual cruelty he'd once shown others. At night, alone in the dark, Seo-rin's question returned. Did you ever love me, or was I just convenient? Dae-suk had nothing but time now. Time to think. Time to remember. Time to finally, painfully, honestly answer the question that had destroyed them both. Paris. 7 years ago. That rooftop. Had he loved her then? He'd loved how she made him feel, important, scene-worthy. He'd loved the way she looked at him, like he was capable of greatness. He'd loved the idea of them together, the beautiful couple, the power partnership. But had he loved her? The woman herself? Her dreams, her fears, her quiet sadness when he ignored her? Her music that spoke what words couldn't? Her patience that he'd mistaken for weakness? Her hope that he'd mistaken for naivety? No. The truth settled into his bones like winter cold. He'd never bothered to know her well enough to love her. She'd been convenient, beautiful, accomplished, undemanding. A possession to display, a role to fill, an accessory to his perfect life. She'd given him everything. He'd given her nothing. The realization brought no comfort. Self-awareness at this stage was just another prison within the prison. Other truths followed, dominoes toppling in his mind. She hadn't been weak for staying. She'd been strong for hoping, for believing he could change, for loving him despite everything. She hadn't been foolish for giving him chances. He'd been cruel for wasting every single one. She hadn't been naive for confronting him that night. She'd been brave. Braver than he'd ever been. The women he'd collected, Ji-won, Hae-in, Min-ji, all the others, they hadn't been conquests. They'd been distractions from the emptiness inside him that no amount of power or sex could fill. And the power he'd worshipped, the empire he'd built, the control he'd craved, all illusions. Mirages. The moment he truly needed it, it had evaporated like morning fog. 3 months into his sentence, Choi, his lawyer, now disbarred and facing his own charges, was found dead in his apartment. Suicide, the news said. Left a note confessing to evidence tampering in multiple cases over 15 years. Dae-suk felt nothing hearing the news. Just added it to the growing list of consequences spiraling out from that one terrible moment. 6 months in, he received a letter from Min-ji, the actress. He almost didn't open it, expecting anger or condemnation. Instead, she wrote, "I'm not writing to forgive you. What you did was unforgivable. But I wanted you to know that meeting Mrs. Kong changed my life. She showed me what real grace looks like. She wasn't angry at me, she was sad for me. She said, you deserve someone who sees you as more than a transaction. I think about that every day. I'm in therapy now. I'm learning my worth. I hope you're learning yours." He read the letter 17 times. Each time, the words cut deeper. A year into his sentence, on what would have been their 8th wedding anniversary, Dae-suk finally allowed himself to cry. Not for himself, not for the life he'd lost or the freedom he'd never get back, but for Seo-rin. For the woman he'd destroyed. For the love he'd never accepted. For the question he'd answered too late. In the darkness of his cell, with nothing left but truth, he whispered to the ghost that haunted him. Yes. Somewhere, somehow, I think I did love you. I just didn't know how. And by the time I might have learned, it was too late. You were gone. And it was my fault. The admission changed nothing. Didn't bring her back. Didn't erase the crime. Didn't undo the damage. But it was honest. Finally, devastatingly honest. 5 years later, a young journalist writing a book about the case came to interview him. She was in her 20s, bright-eyed, trying to understand how someone with everything could throw it all away. Do you have any message for people? She asked. Anything you want to say? Dae-suk looked at her through the plexiglass partition, seeing his younger self in her ambition, her hunger for success. Power is an illusion, he said slowly. Real power is in connection. In vulnerability. In loving someone enough to let them matter more than your ego. He paused. I had a woman who loved me unconditionally. She was patient, kind, forgiving. She gave me chance after chance. And I treated her like she was nothing. Like she was convenient. Do you regret it? Every second of every day. His voice cracked. But regret doesn't resurrect the dead. It doesn't undo what I did. It's just noise. What would you tell your younger self? Dae-suk looked at his hands, older now, weathered by prison life, no longer manicured and powerful. That the only thing that matters in life is how you treat people. That success without love is just expensive loneliness. That the person sleeping beside you might be the most important thing you ever have. He met the journalist's eyes. And that by the time you realize what you've lost, it's already gone. The interview was published 6 months later. The article went viral. People debated whether he deserved redemption, whether remorse mattered, whether someone like him could change. Hae-won, Seo-rin's sister, was asked for comment. Her response was simple, my sister is still dead. His regret doesn't change that. She was right. 18 years into his sentence, Dae-suk became eligible for parole. His lawyer, his third one, prepared arguments about rehabilitation, remorse, model behavior. But Dae-suk declined to attend the hearing. I don't deserve parole, he told his lawyer. I took a life. I deserve to serve my time. The parole board denied his release anyway. He'd served the full 25 years. At 68 years old, Kang Dae-suk walked out of prison into a soul he barely recognized. The city had changed. Technology had advanced. His empire had long since been absorbed by competitors. His name was footnote in business journals, a cautionary tale in true crime podcasts. 0. No one waited for him at the gates. No family. No friends. No women. Just a social worker with paperwork and a halfway house address. He lived simply. A small apartment. A job at a community center teaching business skills to young people. He told them his story when they asked, left out nothing, made no excuses. I was powerful once, he'd say. Had more money than I could spend. Women, success, everything the world says matters. And I threw it away because I never learned the difference between acquiring things and connecting with people. Some students listened. Some didn't. It didn't matter. He told the truth anyway. He never remarried. Never dated. Lived alone with his memories and his ghosts. Every year on the anniversary of Seo-rin's death, he visited her grave, a simple headstone in a cemetery overlooking the Han River. I'm sorry, he'd say, knowing the words were inadequate. I'm so sorry. The wind would blow through the trees, playing music he couldn't quite hear but recognized anyway. Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, her favorite, the piece he'd never bothered to learn about when she was alive. At 73, Kang Dae-suk died alone in his apartment. A stroke, quick and clean. The obituary was 3 lines in the local paper. No mention of Mirage Group. No mention of his former wealth. Just, Kang Dae-suk, 73, died at home. Survived by no immediate family. Services private. But the story didn't die with him. It lived on in true crime documentaries. In women's advocacy groups using Seo-rin's diary to educate about emotional abuse. In business schools teaching ethics. In the cautionary tale parents told their children about what happens when ambition eclipses humanity. And it lived on in the question that had destroyed them both. The question that had no good answer. The question that came too late. The question that haunted Dae-suk until his final breath. Did you ever love me, or was I just convenient? The terrible truth was both. He'd loved her the only way he knew how, selfishly, possessively, inadequately. And she'd been convenient, beautiful, devoted, undemanding. The tragedy was that he'd never learned the difference until the only woman who truly loved him was dead by his hand. He'd been powerful once. Untouchable. Master of an empire. But in the end, the only thing that mattered was the one thing he'd destroyed. And all the power in the world couldn't bring her back.